Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
It's a playoff edition. It's a conference final playoff edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Welcome in. It's Thursday, May 23rd. He is Colby Cohen. I'm Frank Seravalli, and this is Daily Faceoff Live, and we're thrilled to welcome in Bet365 as our sports betting partner just in time for the 2024 playoffs. We'll be here with Bet365 to provide you all the news, analysis, lines, and betting options for the playoffs until one team is left standing in June. No Tyler Yaremchuk today. He's traveling to Dallas for the Western Conference Final, which the puck drops tonight. We've got a big show today. We're going to talk free agents. We're going to talk coaching hires and the coaching market. And, of course, we're going to talk that game one between the New York Rangers and Florida Panthers. Colb, how you doing?
I'm good, Frank. It's been interesting the last couple of days because I feel like this time of year, we're not usually getting a lot of news outside of the two series that are going on and, all the drama, the coaches, the disallowed, the goalie interference. That's normally what we're talking about. But this year, with all the coaching carousel moves, with the trade that happened with Ryan McDonough, it just seems like there's more outside noise happening right now in the playoffs. So I'm glad we're going to go through some of it today.
Okay, there's always something happening, always something percolating. Talked to a couple GMs in the last 24 hours. Hey, it's pro scouting meeting time. It's continued amateur scouting meetings ahead of the draft. We've got the combine coming up in just about 10 days time. There's a lot on the go. Let's dive in and talk about that game one last night. The Florida Panthers prevail at Madison Square Garden. Raucous arena. Sergei Bobrovsky gets the shutout. The New York Rangers, Colby, didn't really come to play. I thought Peter Laviolette said it well after the game when he said, that game just didn't look like us. So was it more what the Rangers didn't do or more what the Florida Panthers did to them?
You know what? I think you got to lean more into what the Florida Panthers did to the New York Rangers. They just never gave them an inch. And the New York Rangers have not seen a team that plays this heavy along the walls, a team that defends, the third circle, which is kind of what I refer to as the house area around the net. A team that has such a disciplined neutral zone. And on top of that, just created an array of issues for the New York Ranger defensive group with the way that they forechecked. I mean, there were just numerous occasions where the Florida Panthers place a puck down in the corner. They win a battle, 45 seconds in the offensive zone. And at the other end, every time the New York Rangers in the neutral zone, they tried to go east-west and then go north. You've got Oliver Ekman-Larsson. You've got Kulikov. They're defensemen. They're back waiting. They're getting to the puck easily. They're coming out clean. And again, other than the quick strike, the shorthanded breakaway, a couple of opportunities on the power play, New York really largely did not put enough pressure on Sergei Bobrovsky or the Florida Panthers defense.
So the Rangers were shut out at home. They now trail a series for the first time so far this spring. What's your level of concern for New York? Is it just one game where that's the worst game we're going to see the Rangers play? By the way, I seem to recall someone out there on social media calling for a Rangers sweep before this series started. Not entirely sure that they watched the other side of the bracket to this point, but how concerned are you for New York?
My level of concern is never that high after a game one. The New York Rangers have been a really good team all season. They've got really good goaltending, which they didn't get last night, and I expect them to get the rest of the series. But look, let's not kid ourselves. The ground and pound game, basically think about an NFL team that just runs the ball 5 yards, 7 yards. That's the Florida Panthers. And there's a certain level of concern I have, Frank, because the New York Rangers can't play physical when they're constantly late to pucks. Now, having said that, I think about what Jim Montgomery preached in round 2 against them with the Bruins. We need to possess the puck more in the offensive zone. You cannot just get one and done opportunities. So I think Peter Laviolette and his staff, which is a very, very good staff, they've been in this situation over the courses of their careers. And I think they'll get in the video room today. They'll look at areas to break the puck out better. They'll talk to their high prize forwards about possessing more pucks. They'll probably show them clips from the Bruins series when the Bruins made the push late in that series to kind of hang around and elongate that series. So I think the Rangers will claw themselves back into the series, but I feel really good about the fact that I picked the Florida Panthers to win the Eastern Conference Final.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of all the things that you said, and I'm like, okay, can the Rangers play physical? Well, we know Florida already does. They ground and pound, but they also have some of the best skill around. They've got
heavy skill.
They've got experienced defensemen, and they've got a goalie who in his career feasts on President's Trophy winners. Pretty impressive for Sergei Bobrovsky to continue his run. He was kind of just okay so far in the postseason, but to get a shutout to open the conference final, not bad. You can also tell the Cats are pretty hungry too to get back to that Stanley Cup final and get another shot. Let's talk about the West. The Dallas Stars will host the Edmonton Oilers in Game 1 of the Western Conference Final. Every other night for the foreseeable future, we'll have one conference final game going until the Stanley Cup final begins on June 8th. Who's your pick in this series and why?
Look, I had to say this. My head says the Dallas Stars are going to win this series. They're too deep. You look at their offense and their lineup, and even without Ropa Hintz, and I do think that's a problem for Dallas to not have Hintz, and we don't know exactly when he will be back.
It'll be soon, by the way. Pete DeBoer ruling him out for Game 1 this morning. He's been skating extensively on his own. My guess is, quote, early in the series. I'd say it's a similar timeline to what Chris Knobloch outlined for Adam Henrique, which was Game 3 or before. I'd imagine that's some kind of world that Rupe Hintz is close to living to as well.
Well,
so
listen,
that's a big one.
That's your number one center. But at the end of the day, even with him out, you start looking down the middle. There's Johnston, there's Robertson, there's Sagan, there's Sam Steele, who I think has given himself some more value in these playoffs. So, my head tells me the Dallas Stars are going to win this game. I think they're going to put too much pressure on Stuart Skinner. I think
win this series or win this game?
Win this series. I'm sorry. I think the way they reload above the puck, they get one man in on a forecheck, and then the way that they then reload to the defensive side of the puck and then continue to put pressure on a team trying to break out, similar to how the Florida Panthers beat up last night on the New York Rangers decor. I think that is a key for this series, the way Dallas forechecks, the way they reload above the puck. And look, it's going to mean Stuart Skinner is going to have to see a lot of rubber. He's going to have to make a lot of big saves. The Edmonton Oilers are going to have to manage the puck better than they do. And at the end of the day, Frank, my heart wants the Edmonton Oilers. I want Connor McDavid in a Stanley Cup final on ABC for the world to see. I really want that. My heart wants that. But my head and my eyes tell me this is going to be a Dallas Stars win in the Western Conference Finals.
I don't think you're wrong. I just think that it's odd to me how lopsided some people seem to see this series as, because I've watched Edmonton up close, and do they have their own issues and mistakes that they make? Yes. But that also would be glossing over the fact that the Stars haven't exactly made life easy on themselves as well in these playoffs. 0-2 at home against Vegas. Nearly blowed 2 consecutive 3-goal plus leads against Colorado. That is, one of these teams is going to be playing with fire here. It's going to be Edmonton and some of the mistakes that they make, or Dallas and some of the issues that they have. I think this series is really close. I have Dallas winning in 6, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if you told me 2 weeks from now that the Edmonton Oilers are playing in the Stanley Cup final. Like, I just think there's the potential for this to be legacy defining. These are two of the best players on planet Earth in McDavid and Draisaitl, 2 of the best playoff performers that we've ever seen. Draisaitl's the 4th fastest player ever to 100 points in a career in the playoffs. He's got 100 and some points in 60 games.
Yeah.
Like, that pace is 132 in the regular season. Like,
and listen,
that is
Frank,
a serious pace.
Big matchup that we'll keep an eye on. Chris Tanev has done a phenomenal job going against the other team's top forwards.
Don't steal my thunder on Chris Tanev. We're going to talk about him in a minute with our new top 75.
I will not.
free
I
agents.
will not. But I think that's a fascinating matchup in this series. And the big thing for me is I am worried about the depth of the Edmonton Oilers getting exposed in this series to a degree that they can't overcome it. That is my concern. It's not the top versus the top. It's the fact that there's nobody deeper than the Dallas Stars, especially at the forward position.
I tend to agree with you, but I think my bigger concern for Edmonton is the goaltending. Stuart Skinner can come out after game 7 and say all he wants. I proved that I can do this. No, you weren't really tested by the Vancouver Canucks in game 6 and 7. If you can get through this series start to finish, then you can make that declaration, but not yet. Not someone who has the worst save percentage of any goaltender in the salary cap era with a minimum of 15 games played. So that's the big one for me. They need some modicum of saves. Let's talk off-ice news. Speak of the devil, Sheldon Keefe. That's exactly what he tweeted this morning as he was officially announced as the next head coach of the New Jersey Devils. He moves on from the Toronto Maple Leafs, where he was fired just a couple weeks ago. And you think about it and you say, well, on the one hand, you're like, duh. I mean, this is one of the most accomplished coaches that we've seen. He's the second fastest ever in NHL history to 200 career regular season wins. He's got multiple 100-point seasons. He has a sparkling record that you can see on your screen, 212, 97, and 40. It's fantastic. My big question is, not is this the right job? Because, of course, I think this is one of the most attractive jobs out there. But is this the right time for Sheldon Keefe? Should he have taken a beat in your mind while he's getting paid for the next 2 years by the Toronto Maple Leafs to find some perspective and sit back and try and assess some of the issues that they ran into? Or do you say, hey, you know what? The Leafs playoff failures, that's not on Sheldon Keefe. That's on their star players for not scoring. That's a coach that didn't get more than 2 goals a game from his team. It's not on Sheldon Keefe. Where do you come out on that? And would you have liked to have seen him take more time?
Look, I thought he would take more time because it felt like Toronto was a beatdown. I mean, you show the photo of him from when he accepted the job versus to when he left the job.
It's like the president of the United States. Like that's what he aged like. And I can't talk about anyone aging.
So I did think he would take some time. And I think the reality is exactly what you said. This job was really attractive. There's a lot of young stars. There's some up and coming defensemen. There's a plethora of prospects that they can use to go out and get a goalie. And I'm guessing that conversation was had between Fitzy and Sheldon Keefe during the interview process. And look, these guys who are coaches, Frank, this is all they know how to do. And if you have an opportunity to go play in an East Coast market, a conference that the Eastern Conference that you know very well, you're going to put your family in a good living situation. You just never know. It's hard to turn down a good opportunity. They're paying him more money than the Toronto Maple Leafs were paying him. I don't know what that is. Maybe you do. But it was announced that he got more money and 4 years. So I actually thought that this is a good move. When I talked to David Quinn, who's a good friend and a former coach of mine, I am always talking to Coach Quinn, no matter what. Even though he's unemployed right now, we talk hockey. He's a coach. That's all these guys know how to do. And I think that probably got the best of Sheldon Keefe when he was deciding what to do.
I can understand that for sure. And we mentioned how attractive that is. They've got the top flight talent up front. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, but I love what they're building on the back end. You've got Luke Hughes, and then you've got Simone Nemeth, and now you can add in Seamus Casey. It's pretty exciting. If the Devils, I'll make you a guarantee. If the New Jersey Devils get 900 or better save percentage, they are a 100% stone cold mortal lock to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair, but I still think Seamus Casey's is going to be part of whatever trade brings them a goaltender, whether it's Linus Ullmark, whether it's Markstrom, whoever it may be.
Way.
I find him to be the odd man out between Hughes, Nemeth, and then he would be the third guy.
No way. No chance. There's no way you sign him, get him to leave school just to trade him. You would just trade him without doing that.
Listen, the Colorado Avalanche signed me. I played a couple of games and then they traded me. I was a second-round pick, just like Seamus Casey. They pulled me out of school a year early, just like Seamus Casey. I've lived that situation because they wanted a veteran blue liner. I was traded 1-for-1 for Matt Hunwick, who went on to play 800 or 900 games. We all know my career didn't go so well, but I'm just saying it does happen, Frank.
I don't know. Great story, but I don't think that's what happens. Let's whip around the coaching market quickly before we get to the top 75 free agents. There's 3 vacancies remaining: the Seattle Kraken, the San Jose Sharks, and the Winnipeg Jets. I think we're all kind of waiting for an announcement. Scott Arniel in Winnipeg, it just makes the most sense. They've gone through the interview process with a couple different people. I think there's lots of speculation and belief that the Kraken are waiting on Coachella Valley and the season that Dan Bilesma and his team are having for their minor league affiliate. But what about the San Jose Sharks? You know, a guy that they're talking to or have interviewed. Marco Sturm has gotten permission from the LA Kings to interview for that job. Obviously not the most desirable job in the NHL, because there's a lot of work to be done with this Sharks team that's not going to have a chance to compete probably while you're on your contract, but still one of 32 nonetheless. And you can understand and imagine why they're kind of trying to think outside the box and go with a new name that we haven't seen or heard before.
Yeah, Marco Sturm kind of reminds me of what Kyle Davidson did with Luke Richardson, a guy who's been an assistant coach. He's paid his dues. He's well respected. He's well liked. He's not an old guy. He's on the younger side of things, so he could communicate with the young players. And look, I think that's something that has to be thought about, because you're probably going to sign Celebrini. Will Smith most likely makes the jump, although I don't know how World Championships, being the 13th forward for half of it, would influence that. And just a side note, Connor Bedard is Canada's 13th forward for their game today, so it is a difficult tournament for young players. But I think Marco Sturm could make a lot of sense, just like Luke Richardson has made a lot of sense in Chicago. The question would be is anybody want to take a risk on that, knowing that David Quinn was brought there and, fired after 2 years, where the team was the worst roster I've ever seen. I mean, it was one of the worst rosters I've ever seen assembled. So it's that whole thing. There's not that many jobs. You kind of have to take it. Luke Richardson had to take it. He kept getting passed up for other opportunities, so he had to take the one in Chicago. I think he's done a fairly good job there, especially communicating with the players. So we'll see. Ryan Warsofsky is the other name that keeps popping up. He was there for the last couple of years. He came up under Spencer Carberry. Very well respected for a young guy who did not play hockey in the NHL, the AHL, the East Coast League, or Division I. He was a Division III player out of Massachusetts.
Warsofsky, name to remember. Let's get to our top 75 free agents, which is coming out later today on dailyfaceoff.com. Let's dive in and talk about that on this week's edition of Icebreakers.
All right, Frank. So you're back with a fresh top 75 free agents ranking on dailyfaceoff.com, which will be posted later this afternoon. And one of the big things that, we try to assess, you in particular, with information from the playoffs, is how does the market truly view a player? And of those guys, which of them have made themselves a lot more money the way the second half of the season and the playoffs have gone, based on where you might have had them earlier this year?
Yeah, well, first I have to give a shout out to AFP Analytics. And if you're not following them already on Twitter, go do so now and check out their spreadsheet. So they're up with their final latest projections from May 20th. This is going to be it heading into July 1. And they do such a good job of trying to answer a question exactly like that. They've got projections that they line up all year. And when you take a look at some guys that have really increased their value, I mean, it's Sean Monahan, it's Jake Gensel, it's Sam Reinhart. Now, the last two guys probably aren't going to be that surprising. Sam Reinhart, magical 56-goal season. Jake Gensel, he gets traded, fits like a glove in Carolina, and puts up some great numbers on top of being a historically strong and consistent performer. But I think this serves as a great reminder of not just the work that Sean Monahan has done to increase his value and get his game back on track after his career was nearly disrailed with some significant injury, but a reminder of the value of centers. I was the guy all, trade deadline period long saying, hey, Sean Monahan is going to get a late first round pick. And people were like, dude, whatever you're smoking, please get me some of that. And he goes for a late first because centers are hard to come by. And he's gotten the production back up to a level, and he's always been responsible where you could see him going from $2.8 million a year in their midseason projection to they have it at 5.3. I'd say probably ends up somewhere in the $5 million range. And if you think back to a few years, like if you heard Sean Monahan and $5 million a year, you wouldn't really blink. But after what he's been through, you'd be like, oh, that's kind of surprising. That's an interesting change. And so a guy that stuck to it, a guy that went to Winnipeg, played well, and a guy who's now put himself in a position to earn some serious money again.
Yeah, I love that story, Frank, because it's cool to see a player that kind of went to the top, came to the bottom, and then pulled himself out of it and came back up to the top, because not every guy has the ability to pull through that. So, all right, buddy, I asked you about the positive. Now we've got to go to the other way. There's players who have cost themselves money over the course of the season. So in that regard, who stands out to you?
No one bigger than Elias Lindholm. And I say that knowing that he had actually a really good playoff for the Vancouver Canucks. He did so many smart, little important things, whether it was a key draw or positioning or chipping in with a huge hit on a forecheck. I loved everything I saw from Elias Lindholm in the playoffs. That said, his production this year took a huge dive. This is a guy who's been an inconsistent producer. He can put up 80 plus points and has shown that he can do that with 40 goals, but 44 points this year. This is a guy that heading into the season was asking the Calgary Flames for $9 million a year on an AAV. The latest projection from AFP Analytics has him down at 6.7 a year times only 5 years. This is a guy who's 30 years old that is in a spot where he's going to need to get paid more. There's a big contract for him, but just look at just these numbers right here. 7 times 8 in January at the midseason to now 5 times 6.7. If you have your calculator out, that's $22 million that he's lost over that period of time. Again, we're talking centers. We're talking really smart players. Could a team go overboard and try and pay him more? Yes, but I think they're going to be concerned about his age. I think they're going to be concerned about his drop in production. And I think there's maybe a little bit of the John Klingberg effect here, where you saw him play a lot worse this season and those numbers begin to drop. That how much does the player internalize and feel, oh my God, I've cost myself a serious amount of money by not signing what was on the table. He was chasing the dough, and now he's in a spot where he's going to still be well paid, but not anywhere near what he once was.
Yeah, well, I certainly never try to look too hard at a guy who didn't transition well after a trade, but this started before the trade during the regular season. So we're not just using a small sample size when we talk about a guy like Elias Lindholm. All right, Frank, let's go a little further down your board. Who's going to jump up and rise this time around that, might be at the point where you stop scrolling?
I was not that high on Chris Tanev at the trade deadline. I was not that high 3 weeks ago when I did my first top 50 board. He was somewhere in the mid 30s in the free agent ranking. And I was like, this is a guy who's a little bit older at 34, doesn't really move all that well, and continues to just take beating after beating. But I know there's no offense here, 1 point in 13 games in the playoffs. But 23 minutes and 41 seconds a night and only a second round pick that it cost the Dallas Stars. He has a chance to be not only the best trade deadline acquisition of the period, but he's a guy that's going to earn himself a pretty decent contract, maybe even more than you might have thought. My guess is probably somewhere in the 3 or 4 years times $4 million a year. And for someone that's been through what he's been through, I think continue to count him out at your own peril. He is just so efficient. I don't think enough is written or said about how little, or I should say how much, Chris Tanev underhandles the puck in a really good way. It's on his stick. It's off his stick. It's to the next guy. There's no fancy stick handling. There's no moves. There's nothing that you look at his game and you say, oh my God, that's sexy, that's flashy, whatever it might be. Always willing to block the shot, make the hit. He's not even overly physical because he doesn't need to be. His positioning is so strong. He's a guy that I think has made a believer in not just me, but a lot of teams that I've talked to already saying, man, can you believe the playoff Chris Tanev is having? He's someone that is certainly going to be in demand this summer.
Listen, the best teams have a complement to their star puck-moving offensive defenseman, and that's Chris Tanev. You put him with any one of these number one 80, 90, 100-point scoring defensemen, your Roman Yossi's or whoever else, Makar's, this guy is going to absolutely solidify your back end. So I'm with you, Frank. I've been so impressed with Tanev in these playoffs. I think his impact on games against the other team's top players has just been one of the reasons Dallas has been able to pull themselves out of holes consistently throughout this Western Conference playoff run. So, Frank, with that, the new top 10 of your 75, of your top 75, what does it look like? Can we get a little sneak peek before it gets up on the website, dailyfaceoff.com, a little bit later?
Yeah, so this is what it looks like, and there's some pretty significant changes here. Here's the top 5. Brady Shea, he slides up a little bit after that 47-point year. And one of the big things as we move to the second half of the top 10, no surprise with those couple guys at the top in Gensel and Reinhart, but Lindholm's still on there. But Chandler Stevenson rose up in a big way. Feedback I got from teams was you had him way too low in the mid-teens the first time around. His production is strong. He's really reliable. And the other big change is Joe Pavelski and Patrick Kane slid down the board a little bit. And that isn't necessarily a knock on those guys. Just we're dealing with a 40-year-old and a 36-year-old, and their projections are strong. And Kane still had a great year or portion of a year with the Detroit Red Wings. But I think it's not to say that there's not going to be interest, but the interest is going to be curated from both ways. Younger building teams aren't going to be as interested in these players, and these guys aren't going to be as interested in teams that don't have a chance to contend. So be interested to see what Joe Pavelski looks like the rest of the way for the Stars, as he saw, a little bit of a drop in production this year.
Well, I'm a big Patrick Kane fan, and I think that if you can get him for a couple $1 million and you're a contender, that's a good guy.
It might cost you though. Like he could be making upwards of $5 or $6 million, and all of a sudden it changes. He's certainly got the numbers to point to that and say that he deserves it.
Absolutely. No, look, I'm all about production, age versus cap hit. Like that completely always will change my mind when talking about a player. I think Steven Stamkos is a fascinating name on your board because I just think that whole situation is very unclear what's going to happen there, Frank.
Yeah, agreed. That'll do it for this week's edition of Icebreakers. Thanks, Cole. All right, that brings us to our hashtag AskDFO inbox question, brought to you by Douglas Mattresses. You can get yours today at douglas.ca/DFO. Douglas Mattresses are handcrafted in Canada, ensuring the highest quality materials and fastest delivery to you. Thanks to everyone who's fired some stuff into our YouTube chat. What kind of contract would you give Patrick Kane?
I think I'd be willing to give him about 2 years at $4 million a season. I don't think I would go any higher than that, just based on the age. But look, he was just about a point a game. He did come off a hip surgery. I actually think he'll be a better player next year. But again, it has to be the right fit because when he's around, his aura is very large. Who has to have the puck on the power play? Who has to be out in certain situations? So I'd be pretty careful.
It's a pretty strong defense market as well. Shea, Pesce, Tanev, we talked about, Montour, Sean Walker, Matt Roy. Of all those guys, who would you be targeting?
I think probably Pesce because he's a little bit younger and I think he's a little bit more complete than some of those other guys. I love Brady Shea. He's a little bit older though. He's 30 versus I think Pesce's 26 years old. I think Brady still moves incredibly well, but I've always been a big fan of Brett Pesce. I thought Carolina made a mistake not trying to lock him up. I know negotiations didn't go all that well last year, but what about you?
I would target Matt Roy. I think he's the best complete defender on that list. Lots of guys have other sexy numbers and things that they put up, but I just think he's an underappreciated player that, sign me up for 4 times $5 million a year of Matt Roy. Let's get to our daily bet segment, which is brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. Open an account with Bet365 today and use promo code DAILY365 to bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Tyler passed along a few shot props, but first I'm going to go with the Edmonton Oilers on the money line, plus 110 tonight. I think we've seen it these playoffs. We've seen it in history. The team that has a big win in game 7 is usually able to roll that over the next game 1 against a team that's had a few days off and a few days to think about it, maybe a little time to rev up their engine. And the Oilers, they've really struggled in game 1s in the Connor McDavid era. I think they're 1-9 or 2-9 in those series. So it hasn't been pretty. They could use a game 1 win to get off on the right foot in Big D. And when it comes to the other shot props that Tyler sent in, do we have those, Gav?
We know Tyler loves his shot
Dude,
props.
I call him all the time the shot prop king. He has, let's see, Wyatt Johnson and Zach Hyman both to hit the over on their shot props today on Bet365. So there you have it, Johnson and Zach Hyman. Hyman's been fantastic in terms of getting those shots. That'll do it for our Bet365 daily bets, which brings us to garbage time and a big press conference today for the Colorado Avalanche. Garbage time is brought to you by Wendy's. Wendy's only ever uses fresh Canadian beef that's never seen the inside of a freezer. Whether you order a Baconator, Dave's Single, or even a Junior Bacon Cheeseburger, you'll only ever find real fresh beef that's real juicy and loaded with fresh toppings. So download the Wendy's app and check out the latest deals and order a burger that's only job is being delicious. Colb, the Avs had a big press conference today with Captain Gabriel Landeskog and GM Chris McFarland. Everyone was saying, hey, the notice of this went out that he would be meeting the media on Thursday. What does this mean? Will he be retiring? Will he say that he cannot continue his career? Nope, false alarm. This is just Gabriel Landeskog giving an update on where he's at, unable to come back and play this season despite his best efforts. Here's insight from him on what he's thinking and feeling.
Really know, right? Like, it's such a big difference from laying, like what I'm doing is essentially laying the foundation to skating, my new kind of skating technique, with a new piece in my knee, right? Laying the foundation and playing in an NHL playoff game is very different, and I'm sure you guys all witnessed it. I mean, mentally, I felt pretty close at times. I'm like, all right, well, I can do this. I can go out there for a few shifts here and there. But I think the best decision was made to just for me to focus on what I was doing throughout the entire playoffs, as hard as it was and as much as I wanted to be out there. It was ultimately the best decision for my health, and I think long-term for this organization as well.
Yeah, so I had some intel at some point, I guess during the first round, that Landeskog wouldn't be coming back in the playoffs. But it's one of those tough things as a reporter. You're like, you don't want to put it out there that he's not going to come back and play. What if they get to the Stanley Cup final and all of a sudden that's given him another 4 to 5 weeks of rehab and is ready to play? Nonetheless, what Gabriel Landeskog's asking of his body after not playing in the NHL for a couple seasons in a row now, that's tough. Sean Couturier most recently came back and did it, but a knee is also maybe a little bit different than a back. What do you think about Landeskog's future?
Listen, I just hope he can get back. You don't like to see a guy's career cut short. He's the captain of that team. I think he's a big part of why they've struggled in the playoffs the last couple of years, not having that heavy physical presence. He makes a really manageable amount of money for what he brings to that team. So I just wish him well. I really do. I've always had a soft spot for the Avs. They drafted me. I played there. I keep in touch with people in the organization. So I honestly just wish him well.
5 more years left at $7 million a year for Gabe Landeskog. But you mentioned the depth and how that eroded Certainly in the playoffs, no Landeskog, no Val Nichushkin, no Nazem Kadri from a few years back. It's a different team. And they've got to find a way to rebuild and bolster that depth. Landeskog would be a big way to do that starting next season. That'll do it for today's edition of Daily Faceoff Live. We'll be back with you 12 noon Eastern on Friday. Can't wait. Enjoy game 1 of the Western Conference Final. We'll talk to you then.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.
Are we good here recording wise?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. See you, boys.